Welcome everyone to day 2 of Pathway to 17 Summit 2023. We are here at the closing plenary where we get to discuss the highlights of our 2-day summit. And as I start, I want to thank and acknowledge some of the companies that have participated in the summit. To start with the Alliance of Digital Finance Associations and all the members of the Alliance that have been presenters. And we'll go to FinEquity, FSD Network, Africa Nenda, Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, Integral, Axion, World Food Program, Senfree, GSMA, and Centbeat, just to name a few. My name is Tariro, Nyimo, and I'm currently the head of stakeholder engagement and fundraising at Digital Frontiers. I am joined by my friends, Dema, who's a financial inclusion policy expert from PHP Development. Welcome. Aliyushata, MD of Unlimit Nigeria. Welcome to you. And Sarah Corley, who's the CEO of the Alliance of Digital Finance Associations. Welcome, friends. Okay, so now to set the scene. 2023 has been and continues to be such an eventful year. I mean, we're coming out of just recovering from COVID-19, but this year has been covered with several conflicts and catastrophic climate events, vulnerable groups into dire situations. And I think that all these pressures that we've been seeing on vulnerable groups, which includes women, youth, and children, there's been a talk of resilience and inclusion that has been a focus conversations for the summit, including jobs for the future. I mean, jobs for good, which is something that was mentioned right at the beginning. But now to get into it, and I'll start with you, Isa. Let's start discussing inclusive finance, inclusive and responsible digital financial service. What have you heard?
So what has resonated around all the voices I've heard during these plenaries has been very intriguing. And not only intriguing, there's a lot of innovation that has also sprung up. And you can hear that there's a lot of experiment that has also been carried out in different countries. And it's not peculiar to one continent. It's spreading. That shows that there's a whole lot that is happening within the digital financial space, right? And if you want to narrow it down to Africa, I would say significantly what has echoed, more importantly here, is that we've had a lot of achievements and we are still growing. Technology is playing a very key role. And you can see that there's a whole lot going on in the space where people in the informal sector, the underserved, the underbanked are being included. But one of the things that has also resonated for us is data. The importance of data, data mining, how we can use data to plan, how we can use data to strategize, how we can use data to speak to specific progress or quick wins that we have had. And if you want to narrow it down to Nigeria, there's a whole lot that has also happened in this space. And you can see that the fintech space, which is the digital financial space, is redefining the entire ecosystem. Transactions are, skyrocketing, despite the fact that, we have challenges with exchange rates. You can see a whole lot of inclusion happening in the agricultural sector, right? In, the informal sector where you have market women, SMEs, sprouting up. So there's a whole lot, that's really, really happening. And I want to really give kudos to the organizers of this great event because I've learned a lot in all of the plenaries that I have attended. And I can guarantee you that more women are being included in the entire ecosystem.
Thank you, Isa. I don't see Eden, but you mentioned MSMEs, you mentioned inclusion, which means inclusion of women. Maybe I can start because I was on a session for MSME and small business, and there was a lot of discussion there about women and their participation, the female economy. You talked about informal economy and the female economy coming out as one of the largest, as considered by the World Economic Forum as the largest emerging market, just the female economy. And in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, that there is a high percentage of women who participate in entrepreneurial activities. So those are some of the things that we were discussing on the panel. But I see, Eden, you're back. We're discussing inclusion and women and what has been said on the summit. Would you care to comment on what you heard?
Yes, thank you, Tariro. Sorry, I missed some part, but yes, definitely as far as women-owned micro and medium enterprises are concerned, I think things are improving a lot, yet there is a gender gap. There is still women-owned MSME, especially in the informal sector, have challenges accessing financial services, including digital financial services. And a few points that I could take away from the discussions in the past has been lack of collateral, lack of credit history, and also lack of ownership over assets. And not only that, I think one key point that was raised and which echoes since the Findex 2011 is the socio-cultural norms, and this cross-cuts. I think this is echoed in almost all the diagnostic studies that has been carried out, mostly in the developing countries. So I think the point here is now, although we know that overall the gender gap in financial inclusion has improved over since 2017, and then has come to 4%, but in the developing countries we are still at 6%. So the point is, this 6%, the 742 million women adults also include MSMEs, and especially when we talk about MSMEs, I'm mostly focusing on those who are informal, in the informal sector, have no access and face all these challenges. So here, what I would like to, my key takeaway from the discussions would be, what are we going to do in terms of reaching to this MSMEs, women-owned MSMEs or women-led MSMEs? Thank you.
Thank you, Issa. And talking about what we are going to do, as Digital Frontiers, we have a program called the Gender Equality Changemaker Program. I know you know that very well, Issa. And last year we celebrated you as one of the finalists, one of the nominees for awards. This year, within Pathway to 17 Summit, we also awarded the winner of RGC Awards, that's Gladys Kanyongo from Zimbabwe. And her project, actually, she was the CEO of a quasi-government institution that provides small loans or loans to MSMEs in the country. And there was an issue there that she then came on a pro bono basis to offer her service in order to sensitize the institution to gender issues and make it more gender inclusive. Following an incident, quite a powerful story. I would encourage people to go and check out Gladys' story, but that's something that also happened within Pathway to 17. And I don't know, Sarah, you have something to say as well?
Well, I was really delighted that I had the opportunity to moderate not one but two publications that had come out from Centre for Financial Inclusion. One of them in particular was focused on cash payments, and then whether they to women as recipients, and whether that has an impact on intimate partner violence, which is obviously an incredibly important topic to discuss. What I thought was really interesting is, there was a lot of assumptions from many people, including me, that there would be potentially an increase. But actually, what a lot of the research that was found was that it actually, in many cases, decreases. So as you inject a little bit of extra cash into the household, so the household can pay their basic expenses, costs, actually the reduction of stress there reduces that violence. Now, there are certainly particular circumstances which, if you haven't seen the session, I encourage you to go and view it, because Swati and Liz and Maureen describe that in more details. But actually, sort of it really helps us understand that, in particular circumstances, yes, there is a risk of increase, but there's also really 6 different strategies that we can take to try and mitigate and sort of stop that increase from happening. And what I really liked about that research was it just reminds us that, we have assumptions. And I think, the gender, changemaker course does the same thing. We all have these assumptions about what we think are social cultural norms, what we think is, sort of gaps and issues to do, particularly with, things like gender, MSMEs. But it's really important that we actually look at the research, look at the evidence to try and sort of make sure that our views come from a place of, what is actually happening, and, not from a place of bias. And talking of bias, that puts me into the second session, which I really enjoyed, which I moderated earlier today, which is about the use of AI. And I was really shocked at some of the work that Alex and Luciana from Centre for Financial Inclusion found around how AIs are still containing quite a lot of bias. So, for example, ChatGPT was asked, to the same question, one from a woman's perspective, one from a male perspective, about savings and use of money, and the response to the female, that was set up it was very different from the man's perspective. The woman's one, clearly there was some biases in ChatGPT, which brought up things like running the household and household expenses and kids, which didn't appear in the male persona one, right? So these biases are creeping in, and also they found quite a lot of evidence of how women are paying high interest rates or getting different loan amounts, and this is in the US, than their male husband, and their financial situations are almost identical. It's just a gender. And although the algorithm itself isn't set up to look at gender, some of the other key questions that they program in the AI, does then lead to this sort of gender issue that comes out. So, I think for me, things that really resonated for me is just don't ask assumptions, when we're designing our products and services, to try not to make assumptions, but also to ask those questions, right? I mean, when you look at what the conversation we had around AI, only one small part of it was the actual coding, which for most of us on this call, I won't say too much about you, Tariro, Isa, and Eden, but I couldn't code anything. Python to me is a snake, not anything to do with some sort of computer language. So I can't necessarily influence the code that is written, but what I can do is ask questions about where the data's come from, what kind of questions we're asking, and also to then look at make sure that there are systems and processes in place, recourse in place, so that if problems and issues are being created, if people are being excluded, that there's a way to report them, investigate them, and then change. And that kind of recourse, whether we're talking about financial services, a transaction that didn't quite go right, or somewhere to report potential problems, issues with a bias and AI. I think closing that learning loop is something I've also taken, and that's really particularly resonated with me.
Absolutely. And a Python is a snake, Sarah. But talking about an inclusive digital economy, a more digitized society, and what we need to do now moving into infrastructure, DPI. We've just come out of a DPI session, and there was a lot of learning. Can I say that DPI, the definition of DPI, the first question was define DPI, because there's so much differences in what you would call DPI, and so many institutions have their way of defining what really constitutes a DPI. But obviously, India as a poster child would come in and looking at what they're doing. But some of the learnings that I got, being somebody who's looking into this and trying to learn more, I think what came out was they're building blocks, right, to a DPI, and that across the globe, there's been a lot of people who've initiated projects, but who haven't succeeded. But the ones who have succeeded, like in India, like in Brazil and Nigeria, and I'd like Issa to talk about the digital identity project in Nigeria, they have a common thread, and so they're building blocks that make up DPI, and that's to do with identity, and that's to do with inclusive payments, and then data governance, and coming up to what you were talking about, AI and your data, and what it feeds into, and how important that is. And I can see that Issa is back. I don't know if I can pass on to you, Issa, to talk about the digital identity in Nigeria as a successful DPI. Do you agree?
Sorry, I lost.
Okay, I can see that Issa has experienced some technology problems, but maybe
ironically being an important part of DPI as well.
So maybe we can take away Nigeria as a poster child, but we know Kenya and M-Pesa, and trying to define if M-Pesa is a DPI itself. And usually when you say digital public infrastructure, you associate governments with it, and you associate e-government issues, but not necessarily. I think the public in digital public infrastructure can be the citizens who are participating in that ecosystem. And I think there's also a thread that came out of that session, that it's an ecosystem, it's building an ecosystem, it's opening up for other players, it's opening up for other market players to do that. And I think M-Pesa does that very well. So it can be considered a DPI. But Eden, what would you say about this?
Yeah, I actually the session on DPI was very interesting, as everybody would agree with me. And the most interesting takeaway for me was when I when I did the digital money course, we did learn about the India stack and the Aadhaar ID system. So it's very interesting. I would say that the way that countries are now creating the kind of what David has mentioned it very clearly, is we need to be very broad-based in our approach in terms of developing our DPI, so not DPG. But then reflecting back on what Sabine and Kamia also added, I do underscore what Sabine mentioned, that in order for a country to create develop the DPI, the regulatory and the policy environment should be facilitating. I think that is very important, because the governance part is one of the major part in the DPI development. And on the other thing, for me, the question arises. I come from a small country, underdeveloped country with very less resources. So similarly, for those who can resonate with me, especially coming from small countries, I just think about how should the development of the DPI, whether it should be DPI or DPG. And I say it because, again, I go back to what David said, the cost being the major factor. So that is also one key point that I would like to take away when we think about how to create the kind of facilitative DPI. Thank you.
Thank you, Eden. Sarah, anything to add?
I think Eden made a really good point there, and when we think about scale, I mean, we often look towards countries like Nigeria, like India, who have got large populations. And then you compare that to smaller, countries across the world, and you sort of start to think, how can these, smaller countries invest so much money in infrastructure when there's so few people? But, I think, as sort of Kamia was mentioning right at the end of the session there, often the cost of setting up DPI, it doesn't matter if it's for 1 million, 500,000 or 25 million. Often, the cost is very similar right at the beginning. So, I think for me, one of the things that I find really interesting is trying to think about what it could mean for continents, or what, so that actually, smaller countries can, sort of work perhaps in their region, in their continent, with other bordering countries, to make sort of scale size much more feasible, much more achievable and affordable. But obviously, coming back, to the same thing, that policy regulatory space, it's difficult enough to get that right within your own country, but when you start to work with others, it can be difficult. I mean, we know cross-border payments have been, a very big challenge, sort of for many years, and yet for many MSMEs in particular, that line of where the border exists, right through where they trade, and actually it's a real big problem holding people back. So yeah, I think that was sort of one of the takeaways that I took away from that session was, how can we afford to make sure that everyone across the globe will have the opportunity to have the same benefit from the same kind of infrastructure as sort of some trailblazers have already put in place. And so I'm really keen to hear from Isa, because obviously Nigeria is one of those that has got that scale.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. I think in Nigeria, we have the National Data Protection, Commission, and you can see that the government is trying a lot to see how, first they can, as we are mining the data, we are also protecting the identity, behind that data, which is very, very key and important. Data protection is very key. And when you try to narrow that into the digital financial space, you will agree with me that first, there's a whole lot of challenges that will come, which is first, there's fraud that is currently taking place in the digital financial space. There is data compromise. There is identity theft, right? So if you equate all of these together, you can see that, while you are mining data, also comes its own challenges. So Nigerian government is doing a lot to see how first they can warehouse this data, regulate the operators that are mining the data, then at the same time protect those whose data are being warehoused. And I think all of these go hand in hand. Then beyond this, there is also the part where you need to strategize to ensure that you narrow it to the economy. Like today in Nigeria, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs want to reach about 60 million homes. How do you reach out to these homes if you don't have actionable data to speak to? And that is where you will see that we've made significant progress in terms of identifying those who really, really are vulnerable and those who actually need these social safety nets programs. And if you put all of these together, you can see that we've had significant improvement in the Nigerian ecosystem. Another thing that I would also like to put on the layer of these is that beyond the data that is being collated, a lot of people are still excluded within the entire value chain. Why? There are people who don't have access to finance. There are people who don't even have a mobile phone, not even a smartphone. I'm talking about basic phone, right? And I'm quite aware of a company that is coming up with a good solution that is going to integrate all of this data together, and you'll be able to access a lot of services on a basic phone where all of the things will be customized. And I heard it's resonated in almost all the section where people talk about literacy challenges, where they also talked about localizing the content of the language that is situated in those environments. And so this company had actually done a research, and they are coming up with reduced cost in terms of accessing finance. They are also coming with addressing literacy. Like in Nigeria, for instance, we have 3 major Nigerian languages. So they are seeing how they can reach out to more people, localizing the content, then bringing a lot of services on that same platform, which is a very innovative and smart move for me. First, they want to see beyond financially including all of these people within the ecosystem to see how they can bring in microcredit, micro-agric, micro-pension, all of those micro products that can best serve the informal sector or the underserved communities. And you cannot achieve this if you don't have real data that you can speak to. So you can see the importance of data, because today data is more expensive than even the crude oil that we have. So we all know that data is very, very key in all of the economy decisions that every country is going to be making, or every organization will be making. Data is key, and data is one of the key ingredients to facilitating inclusiveness, whether social inclusiveness, financial inclusiveness, I mean, name it. We really, really need to give data mining attention, data protection attention, and of course, data strategy attention as well.
Thank you, Isa. And I think, you know, it's fascinating when we talk about success stories such as Nigeria at that scale, something that both you and Sarah has mentioned. And you mentioned language. There's so many languages that are spoken in Nigeria. There's so many languages that are spoken in India. So there's scale, and then there's language barriers, but there's still success stories that are coming on, building this infrastructure with a purpose to include those that are underserved, those that are remote, both still a thread of success stories for both countries there. And I remember something that was said in the previous session about India and the scale they reached, that it was very odd because the only other institutions that had that much scale was Google and Facebook, right? I thought that was a pretty good comparison there. But is there anyone else who wants to talk about DPI? Or maybe I can mention that at Digital Frontiers, we already have like our inclusive digital economy courses. That's the IDED course, inclusive economic development and ideals, imagining a digital finance for all courses that are absolutely great and that are certified or that have our academic partner, the Fletcher School at Tufts University in there. We also have IIPS, which, like we said when we were saying the building blocks for DPI, it includes payments, it includes data, which Isa was talking about, and digital identity. We have a digital identity course on our certified digital finance practitioner programs. So if you want to learn more, like I do, I would go to DFI courses and take a look and get the conversation going further. Sarah, is there anything else you want to talk about policy, governance, and DPI?
As Isa was talking, you know, what really struck me is, you know, we've been recently at the Alliance looking at the topic of cloud computing, which is quite a niche topic, but certainly when you look at organizations such as Time Bank, a digital bank launched in several countries across the globe, in particular started in South Africa. Cloud computing is, they wouldn't be able to do what they do. They wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't look like they do without cloud computing. And of course, in some countries, you know, cloud computing is not legal, is not allowed, it's not regulated for, or is not well known about or understood. But one of the things that came up in our research was just how few cybersecurity and data protection policies, or at least up-to-date ones. I mean, you know, when you sort of think about how things have rapidly changed in the last few years, if those policies are more than 5 or 6 years old, they're likely to be quite significantly out of date. So I think, you know, in order for us to really, you know, and we've talked about how technology, I think that was one of the first things that, you know, technology has really allowed so many great advances. And, you know, technology is really going to be able to help us, you know, try and, you know, reach everybody because of its scale, because of its potential, its reach. It's, you know, we can't have, you know, banking. We know we can't have a banking infrastructure everywhere. Digital will enable us to reach all parts of the globe. But yet so few countries have the right regulatory regime to allow those things to thrive. And, you know, we don't really have a lot of conversation happening in many countries around just the digital transformation agenda. I mean, you know, Eden, so we've unfortunately lost both of you during this session, where, you know, internet connectivity not being stable is a challenge. But we also know, you know, electricity can also be a challenge. So, you know, I think as much as technology, you know, is moving very rapidly, and of course regulation will always be slightly behind. There's no way that we can expect regulation to be faster than technology, you know, but is our regulation at least keeping up with a, you know, at a distance? Are we asking the right questions? The skills and knowledge of, you know, both that professionals, you know, within the private sector, but also the public sector, I think is something we should be thinking about. You know, things like AI, DPI, all these new things that are coming that we sort of understand. Are we aware of them? Are we aware of the pros and cons? Are we aware of how they can be successfully implemented, or the risks that they bring, and are we able to deliver those products and services safely, innovatively enough within the country? So that's something, that's sort of the capacity of people, and the regulatory environment are two things that sort of also have been on my mind during these conversations. Not sure if anyone else would have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Sarah, because if you look at technology, I think over the last decade in Nigeria, technology has actually done a lot for us, in trying to redefine how we think, how we do things. And will I say kudos to COVID, because COVID actually made a lot of things happen faster. This platform we are having today wouldn't have been made possible and this unique without COVID. So technology has played a very significant role in making sure we redefine how we think, how we work, and how we even innovate. And like you were saying, I think I really sympathize with regulators, if you ask me, because they are not operators. And because they are regulators, so they are looking at, how they can stabilize things, ensure that people stick to rules of engagement, essentially, right? And you don't go overboard, with rules of businesses. But operators want to move quicker and faster, because they also don't want to stifle innovation, right? So innovation is moving faster and quicker because operators are reacting to consumer feedbacks, right? Mechanism, because when consumers give feedback, it is expected that operators will want to quickly tweak, one or two things and ensure that they suit that part of what consumers are talking about. You talked about the dichotomy between the male gender, the female gender when it comes to AI, the biases that happens and all of that. So that's a huge feedback from what we've had today, the session we've had today. So that can be imputed into, action point for moving forward on how to streamline all of these activities and ensure that we give equal opportunity, to everybody, moving forward. Then even the class of remuneration, for all the gender, the female gender, the male gender, it's very, very important, because you find out that both genders are doing, even, I'm not trying to advocate for women, but women are more effective, they are more efficient, they plan even better, right? But unfortunately, they don't really get compensated for what they do, right? And we need to really, think how we can rethink the entire ecosystem. But thankfully, technology is speaking a language that is not biased. I will tell you why. Because if you've gotten a female programmer, right, and you've gotten a male programmer, they're not going to price them differently. They're going to price them equally, right? They're going to price them based on their capacity, their capability to perform. And that's exactly what technology is doing differently for us. So most times, technology has also aided women to work from home. We don't used to have this, so women who are 100% housewife, but are skilled and want to earn additionally in what they're doing, technology has provided a platform for them to earn and also increase, their livelihood through, the platform that technology presents. So, but one of the things that I also find out very intriguing is that we talk about fintech, but there is the SAFTech, the service technology-driven ecosystem, where is not regulated. I will break it down. Like, you see the hail riders, the Uber, the Taxify of this world. Nobody really regulates that industry. You talk about food. You order for food. Hygiene is very important. People order for food online. You pay for them online and all of that. Nobody really regulates that. So that's another big, huge chunk of market that is, blossoming right now. And I really think that a lot of countries will really look at how they can develop a framework to address the service-driven technology space, so that at least consumers will be protected and everybody will have equal opportunity to participate in the entire value chain.
You're talking about platforms, you're talking about e-commerce, and that are technology driven and that are changing and disrupting how we live our lives. But then the delivery side, the distribution and how it then gets to you, the service side is the one that you're saying is problematic or might need us to look at it a little bit more further. And as we evolve into this digital economy, what are the risks that we're facing? And it makes me think about even moving to a digital economy and how we want to do cross-border payments. We want to have one single continent if we're looking at Africa. But then it's so difficult from a policy perspective, to try and merge this, because in Malawi, we have our own policy and how we do things and our criteria. And then in, let's say, DRC, there's a different way of doing things, and trying to harmonize that is very different. And data sharing, coming back to data, I think one of the things that can be problematic for governments and policy and public sector champions is thinking that their data is not secure or is not safe, or the privacy is compromised, can be something that makes us still think maybe we might be a long way from what we really want, looking at an African perspective. And Sarah, you mentioned electricity, the infrastructure part, connectivity, devices. I know we're being very to have solutions that doesn't have device as a barrier, because then we might not be creating solutions that are inclusive, if we define inclusive in a broader way. So those are some of the things that just came to my mind whilst you were talking, Isa. I don't know, Eden, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, so very interesting discussion. But when we talk about inclusive digital payment infrastructure, one of my key takeaway is based on what Sabine mentioned in terms of how do we define inclusivity in payments. So I really like the idea of how Africa Nenda looks at it. Like he said, it depends, and definitely it depends in terms of how the approach is. And I want to bring it in terms of what is happening in most countries. I actually want to echo Sabine in terms of when we talk about inclusivity. And Issa did also mention that when it is at the ground level, the instant payment scheme, the very dynamic ones, they are developed or implemented by fintechs. But when you look at the governance, or when you look at the partnerships, when you look at the whether the fintechs who are in the forefront of this very dynamic products and services have the least participation in the decision making. So which means to say how inclusive are we in terms of payment regulations or policy making. So coming back to I take this point again to another experience of mine, working on a digital literacy roadmap for a country in South Asia. And one of the key barriers that the policymakers and the regulators mentioned was that they lacked, they had very limited knowledge and experience in digital financial literacy. And when I joined these two, what I'm trying to say is, if you do not include the people who are driving on your highway, then how are you going to really, upskill yourself? So basically, coming back to the point in terms of inclusivity in payments, I think it is very important that all the actors, especially the fintechs, should be included in the policy making, in the strategy development, and whatever policy are being put in place in terms of developing the digital financial inclusion, which should again include the infrastructure. Yes, thank you.
Spot on, Eddie. I think you couldn't have said it any differently, because if you look at the different stakeholders that we're supposed to have in the ecosystem. You just mentioned it. You can't really downplay knowledge and experience. It's very, very key. I'm privileged, and I'm very grateful to the Nigerian economy, where I would say that I was part of those who started mobile money in Nigeria. And that was what actually gave birth to a lot of the fintech companies that we have today. So in terms of experience, in terms of on-the-field experience, I've gotten so much detail, right? And I would like to also say that I've shared a lot with regulators. I've been in different platforms with regulators where we also share ideas. But like you said, sometimes there is a need for regulators to bring in one or two practitioners within the entire ecosystem to be part of the decision-making mechanism, because that is the only way you can make a difference. That is the only way you can, instill a very positive response, from every act of the development that you want to achieve in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of digital financial payments. Then you spoke about something, Tariro, earlier, when you talk about cross-border payment. You see, the truth is, today, there is a drive with digital payment that is driving towards a global village where everyone is speaking the same language, because there is a common denominator, a currency that everybody's tweaked to, which I wouldn't want us to really, over-depend on. I don't want to mention it, but I know of a solution today where if you send money from Nigeria, right, and you send it to Ghana, it settles in Ghana cedis. If you send it to Kenya, it's settled in Kenya's shillings. If you send it to South Africa, it settles in South Africa rands. So, and the same thing, if you send it to UK, it settles there. So one of the challenges they've had is, how do you equate the exchange rates between country and country? And yes, you were right earlier. That is where all the countries need to come together and have a trade agreement among them. Because if payment is happening on that scale, on that level, it will facilitate trade, it will facilitate development, it will facilitate a lot of growth activity within the continental level and even on the global level. So this is one of the things I feel that we need to also look at. I have access to all of the network of those who are providing, this opportunity, but they will also need a lot of support from decision makers to make it happen. Thank you.
And I'm just going to sort of come in here because we're getting towards the end of this session, but it really resonates with me what you've both said. And we've talked a lot about how payments are so key. Payments are often the first step, the first foray that people take into digital finance. Now, hopefully, that first experience is very positive, and it then continues, hopefully, to actually making more payments, receiving, sending more money, whether that's internationally or locally within the country, access to then things like savings, insurance, pensions, loans, and that is where the increased journey into financial resilience begins, right? Payments is just the very beginning, but ultimately we haven't got payments right yet. So expecting all the other things to happen when we still haven't quite managed to sort out, inclusive payment systems, it gives us a reminder that actually, we need to try and make those payments, and that system, as inclusive, as equitable as possible, not just for the recipient, but for all of those involved in the digital finance ecosystem too. And I love how you use the words collaboration there and sharing learning and best practice, because actually fundamentally, one of the things that really resonated with me, and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the formation of the Alliance of Digital Finance Associations, was the idea that within countries we bring together all sorts of different players, from fintechs, from banks, from MNOs, for development sector regulators, to try and have these conversations together and no longer just operate in silos, but actually to try and identify what are the key issues affecting our country and our industry, and what one or two key things can we do that would change, that would then impact and make it much more accessible for for our population, but also more equitable for our ecosystem. And that collaboration and shared learning, I think, is something that really resonates with me, and I hope as an audience with you too. Because I just see that each of us have a responsibility to try and contribute to our ecosystem, to try and contribute to include, not just include, but actually make our populations, more financially resilient, and also be able to contribute to this digital economy, which we know is not going to go away. And the basic part of contributing to a digital economy is being able to, make a payment digitally as well. So sort of to try and begin to wrap up, I mean, we've got 1 minute, so I'm just going to ask each of you very, very briefly to say one thing, sort of 20 seconds each, that you yourself are going to do tomorrow as a result of what you've heard at Pathway to 17. So Tariro, I'm putting you in the hot seat first.
I'm going to check my chat GPT, sorry, and see how biased it is. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm going to learn some more about DPI and the blocks of DPI and what the DPI approach is. I'm going to learn about the different countries and where they are in their digital development journey, and equip myself to participate in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Tariro. Eden, you next.
Yeah, thank you. Me, I would second what Tariro has definitely being a gender. I'm more interested, which, like I said, stands at 6% for being. So I would be more systems and financial services can do for this excluded group of women who are much in a worse position than women like us. So that is what I would like to pursue more, and also what artificial intelligence can do. So yes, that's in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eden. Isa?
Yeah, for me, on a lighter note, I think I was raised by a woman. So I have a special bias. 100% I was raised by a woman. So I have a special bias for women, most especially widows. There's what I will be doing differently. I've had a lot of experiences here, which is more or less like a cross-fertilization of ideas. And what I'll be taking home for me is that there is a project that I'm currently working on, which has to do with women on the wheels. Now, these are women, vulnerable women who are, trying to make ends meet, and they cut across the entire sub-Sahara African region. They have membership span. So I will take my learnings from here to see how I can involve them more in terms of inclusiveness. Then I will also use my position, right, to see how I can interact more with the government, to see how government can change a whole lot of things within all of the ecosystem based on what I have learned from here and from other countries. And I would like to also congratulate and thank the organizers of this forum, that this has been very, very educative, and it is very, very impressive. I look forward to yet another interesting episode come next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Tariro. Thank you, Eden. I'll just end with my one thing. I think it's just to keep asking questions. There is never a question that is too easy, too simplistic. Asking questions helps us all learn more. And of course, the key thing that everyone will know about me is to network. It's been wonderful to see so many new faces, to meet new people during Pathway, to hear from new experts. And I encourage you all to remain and to grow your own networks, because this is how you get to meet, to learn, to share, to develop best practice, and be stimulated to create these new ideas for products and services. Isa, hopefully we'll be inviting you back next year to talk about your new projects.
No problem.
Eden, thank you so much for sharing your experiences today. It's been fascinating to hear some of the projects you've been working on. Tariro, my friend, of course, as always, it's been a pleasure to chat with you and to sort of think about capacity building and how we can improve our skills and knowledge. And I look forward to seeing you all at Pathway to 17 Summit 2024 next year. Till then, thank you everyone that's spoken, everyone who's attended, and everybody behind the scenes who put the event together. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.